Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Dr. Wright Breaks It Down for You. My name is Jessica, and I'm here with my dad, Dr. Wright. Hey, Dad.
Hi, Jess.
My dad is an inventor, as many of you all know, but he's also a chemistry teacher, so I thought it'd be fun to bring together these podcasts to give him a bigger platform to show all of his crazy stories and awesome insights on the universe. So, Dad, you sent me a really interesting article about crowds and how dangerous crowds can be, how the situation can very quickly change from neutral to a really life and death situation.
You know, my dad always hated crowds. He didn't want to go anywhere where there was a crowd. On the other hand, my wife, Vicky, loves crowds. She even says, if there's a crowd, then there's a reason to be there. Let's go. My dad wasn't all wrong, though. They can be just horrible. And it's something that we've all really got to be aware of. You know, the biggest crowd that supposedly ever existed was in Shanghai back in 2010 for the World Expo. 73 million people.
Wow.
I mean, I can't even fathom the number of porta potties. I mean, that's just a whole city at one place. Now, the biggest crowd I've ever been in, and I will tell you, it made me nervous. At 4th of July, St. Louis has this big VP fair. I think it was 1989 when I was there. It had 3 million people.
Wow, 3 million people. Was there like something going on or just the...
They have air shows and concerts and all kinds of stuff.
Right.
And we brought the kids, and that makes it that much more perilous when you have little ones that you really got to watch out for.
Right.
You know, Jessica, there's two main reasons that you have to be concerned in a crowd. And one is the mentality of the individuals in the crowd. And two, it's the venue, where you're at. Now, when I talk about mob mentality, we're talking about what's this about? Is this a peace and freedom concert? Or is this a soccer match where you have hooligans that want to start something in the stands? You really got to be aware of that.
Right.
You've got to be aware of your surroundings because things, like you said, can turn bad really, really fast. The second thing is the venue. The venue is just as important as anything. Even in a small place like a small concert hall, boy, I'll tell you, people get crowded and they get nervous or people go for the doors and they can cause a situation where people die.
Right.
And you've got to be really aware of your venue. There's things you can do to make it safer. The first thing is you got to establish a plan. Whenever you go, I don't care if it's Mardi Gras or whether it's a closed space or whether it's a concert, you really got to get a plan. Know where you're going to go. Establish a memorable place to meet. We get separated. Let's go over here.
But I remember you would always do that when we were kids. You would always say, like, all right, everyone, we're going to meet at this statue or at this building.
It's really important. You know, if we get separated, meet at the statue. Or if you get separated, you can go to a safety person. And you've got to make it clear to the kids. Now, see that guy over there? He is a police officer. See his hat? Look for the badge. So you got to give these kids the specific orders and say, this is what you do. What if?
Right.
Another thing which is really simple is arrive early and leave early. If you arrive early, you can figure out where the exits are. You can make sure everyone understands where we're going to meet afterwards. And oftentimes they say, don't just go for the main exit. Look for the secondary exits. People have a tendency to bolt for those big doors. You might want to think about where these secondary exits are. This is really important with kids, too. Make sure they know where to go. Know what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally.
The third one is carry a whistle. And maybe because that's where my head's at, because that's what I invented. But I got a letter from a girl who told me that her life was saved. She said she was being crushed at a concert, and they were all trying to push through this little gate, and she could feel herself almost going down. And she was a strong 20-year-old woman who was trying to fight the push, but she was being actually sucked down. And she reaches in her purse, pulls out my storm whistle, and she blows it. And people backed off because they thought it was the cops. She really feels that her life was saved because of that whistle. Because people were made aware of the fact that she was there and she was in trouble. Lastly, in case of a stampede, now this is the worst case scenario. If people get nervous and they start running, it's so important you understand what to do. The basic prevailing thought is this. If you're in an open area, go for the edge of the crowd. Try to get out of the middle because that's where the pressure is. On the other hand, if you're in a closed area, this is a terrible thing to think about, but people who are killed typically are the ones against the walls. And so
what do you,
really gotta...
It just seems as though the safer spots when you're in a crowd would be against the wall. The walls are where the doors are, you know.
I understand exactly what you're saying. And this is something that I really stopped and studied. And from my understanding, if you're in an open area, a big open area where there's a lot of people moving,
Like
fine.
a field, do you mean? Or like
a field or an open concert and everybody starts moving, yes. Try to move to the outside of the crowd. Get out of that big push in the middle and get to the outside. But if they're compressing you into a tight space, do everything you can to keep off that wall. I talked to a guy who was an experienced actor, and he said, now, Howard, if you ever get in a movie and they ask you to be one of the people in one of the scenes where everyone's running, make sure you're on the edge, because if you're in the middle, people will run you down. And I said, okay, that's important to know. If I'm ever in a fast-moving crowd, get to the outside. But we're not talking about a fast-moving crowd here. We're talking about a big crowd that's moving very slowly and very powerfully and pushing and crushing. That's where you have to be very, very wary about being next to an unmovable object like a door or like a chain link fence or like a wall. And so I think you've really got to be smart. You've got to look around and say, okay, this crowd is just cramming in here. I've got to get back. I've got to get into the looser aspect of the whole thing. And with the kids, make sure you have that kid in your arm, but better yet, you hold them right up against you. Because kids, when they get really scared and nervous, they have a tendency to fall to the ground and cover up. In a crowd like that, you really don't want the kid on the ground. You've got to pick him up and make sure he knows he's right with you. And I know this is a tough subject to talk about, but it's the truth. Know your venue, know where the exits are. If they're crushing in, you got to beat the crush, stay off that wall. If it's a fast-moving crowd, of course, get to the outside. But on the other hand, P.T. Barnum said, every crowd has a silver lining, which is kind of funny. Because it's fun there, and you got your funnel cakes, and it's cool. Just make sure you're prepared.
Right. Like Mom said, there's a crowd, it means something really awesome is going on.
Right.
And so,
yeah.
God, I'll try to keep that in mind, to stay away from the walls, if God forbid I ever get in a situation like that, and bring my storm whistle. Well, thanks so much, Dad, for chatting with me today. Please tune in next week to hear about our next delightful scientific phenomena. If anyone has, again, any ideas for podcasts, please just post them in our comments section on our YouTube channel, which is Dr. Wright Podcast, and that would be totally awesome. We'd love to hear from you all. Hey, thanks, Dad.
Bye-bye now.